the most despicable cartel leader, the least trustworthy member of the Horde, Gallywix. Just a few years after his disgraced exit from the Horde, he had returned to the game, and by allying with xal'atath and harvesting black blood, he managed to solidify his grip over a terrified populace until this.
It's not over till I say it's over. And I always win! Look out! Huh? Ah!
So yeah, Gallywix is rather dead looking, and it raises a humongous question. What about the last time we saw him? Because the last time we saw him was in Tazavesh. He was there cutting deals with brokers. And that was weird because the brokers, oddly enough, look like ethereals, and as I'm sure you've noticed, the ethereals are fairly major to the lore right now. Indeed, their fallen homeworld Koresh may even be the final patch of this expansion. Okay, today's video is about how Gallywix was murdered for the lore, because Blizzard really did just get rid of him pretty damn quickly. And there's a point to that. The lore is entering a new era, and in crushing Gallywix, they have tied up loose ends, and that is hardly a surprising thing. WoW's story is now under new management, as is Goblin kind. And once we've brought the story of Gallywix together, you'll learn the huge connection tying all of this. And if you've ever wondered, could Venari, that one character that we all pretty much loved, is she going to come back? Could she come back? Well, you'll even find out how. We've also got to talk a bit about gearing up, because I've got a best-in-slot IRL upgrade. It's today's sponsor, Henson Shaving, because with them, you will get a better shave, and you will spend between $3 and $5 a year on blade refills. Yes, between $3 and $5. It's insane. And that's because Henson are not just another cartridge brand whose MO is to hook you on wasteful plastic-filled cartridges that are stupidly expensive. So here's how I shave. This is my Henson razor. I pop the top off, I insert a blade, and then I shave. It really is as simple as that. You see, cartridge blades, right? They're expensive, so people often end up using them beyond proper sharpness. In fact, over 80% of shavers admit to knowingly shaving with a dull blade. That makes sense. I've done that. And so with Henson, the single disposable blade costs only 10 cents. It allows for a sharp blade every shave without the extra cost. And it's huge for quality of life. The Henson razor has got only one point of contact with your skin. This minimizes damage compared to dragging multiple blades across your skin. That results in significantly less irritation, razor burn, and ingrown hairs. And it's precision engineered with tight tolerances and a 30-degree angle. There's no rattle whenever you shake it about. It is a stable as hell thing to shave with, and it is super comfortable to use. Compared to Henson, cartridge razors just feel like a scam. You can visit hensonshaving.com/Bellular and use code Bellular today to get 100 free blades with your purchase. First, though, the journey of Jastor Gallywix, his maddest deals, and then why Blizzard cut him out of the lore and why. So, Gallywix is a guy who would do anything to stay on top. And you can say that's kind of just how goblins are, but there's mounting evidence that can kind of point to the other way. After Gallywix sided the Bilgewater cartel with Sylvanas and sold out the whole world for a big Azerite payday, he was ejected from the Horde. So when that happened, what was Goblin society to do without the immense weight of Gallywix holding them down? You know, his immense financial weight. Well, they reformed. Gazlo took over the Bilgewater and he instituted massive labor reforms. He toured every cartel and found the working conditions under Gallywix were, funnily enough, completely horrendous. And this all comes from a short story named The Goblin Way that was released just before the War Within. So what Blizzard did is they intentionally set up a major shift in Goblin culture. Far less of a race to the bottom, a little bit less cutthroat, and more, you know, long-term shareholder value, as opposed to just the next quarter. But for all this to truly happen, Gallywix would have to go. And even before we players knew he was back, his influence over goblins remained powerful. So powerful that Marin Noggenfodder, Gazlo's friend, had to be strong-armed into the new way of working. Noggenfodder was just so used to the past. It was the world in which he lived. And in a way that stemmed from fear. He basically said he needed the promise of Horde protection if he was to reform what he was doing. Now, in the end, Noggenfodder promised reform, but that was clearly still impossible, because the next time we met Noggenfodder in patch 11.1, he was firmly under the thumb of Gallywix, and Gallywix was clearly back. Now, we had thought there was no way that Gallywix had clawed his way to the top. It seemed weird. The last time we saw the guy, he was cutting deals in Tazavesh. But then Orwena found this recording directing the Dark Fuse goblins. And with that recording, it was confirmed. Gallywix was back on the scene. Then we saw this interaction with xal'atath.
Meeting adjourned.
I see you are already making good use of the black blood.
Xal'atath, nice to see you. What brings you here?
It has been some time. Is everything proceeding as planned?
The repairs have been more challenging than expected. The costs alone
Are irrelevant.
Of course. I just need more time.
Do not disappoint me.
Don't you worry. I won't.
Seeing that, we finally knew why Gallywix was back. He'd aligned himself with xal'atath, and she was pumping his goons with black blood weaponry. Gallywix wasn't just dealing with someone like Sylvanas, who was war chief. xal'atath is more of a pure villain. There's not really a guise of serving the Horde like Sylvanas tried to keep up, and that did put Gallywix firmly in the true villain camp with xal'atath. And that opened the way for his downfall. We of course had our hero, Gazlo, who represented change, our villain Gallywix, who had ran Goblin society into a dead end that forced them to work for the enemy. In a way, not unlike, say, what happened to the Nightborn and the Legion. They were backed into a corner and forced into a terrible place. This story would only end one way. One of them had to die. So Gallywix sent Nikki the Fixer after Gazlo, but Renzik took the bullet, and that was the single tragic death that spiraled Undermine into full-blown revolution. Renzik was also a symbol here. You see, both Renzik and Gallywix had grown up in the slums, but one came out with honor, the other one came out the kind of guy who would make a deal with xal'atath. And it was in the wake of Renzik's death that Gazlo realized he had had enough. He needed to save Goblin society. It was time to take down Gallywix. So we pull down his golden statue, we storm the Galagio, and we finally find Gallywix in his true form. A larger-than-life chrome statue, a symbol of everything bad about Goblin society. So, let's talk about potential. Let's talk about deals. We all know the rather slapstick way that Gallywix ultimately ended up dying, but to give that a little bit of weight and shape up this story, well, let me tell you what kind of guy he really was. So this is Drudgetown, Kazan. It's where the lowest of Goblin society live in complete poverty. They're exploited by gangs, they're forced into the worst jobs, and that's actually where Gallywix got his start. Gangsters put the squeeze on his father's tinker shop, so Gallywix shipped bombs to their hideout. And it worked, brutally efficient, and he went straight to the top of the Bilgewater cartel. At the time, they were the independent cartel running Kazan. Now, way before Battle for Azeroth, even before the Cataclysm, one of Gallywix's mining operations unearthed the first ever Azerite, which he then fashioned his staff out of. He knew that it had power that he could trade one day, but first there was disaster. Deathwing emerges, Kazan is sank, it's complete chaos, but also an opportunity for Gallywix. He managed to enslave everyone on the island with money, and after a circuit around Azeroth's oceans, they landed on Ashara and joined the Horde. And before long, Gallywix did the most Gallywix thing and had his people build the Pleasure Palace. Have you done, as an example, the Grand Gulf World Quest in Undermine? Well, Gallywix had his own course carved out in Ashara. He pumped Ashara so hard of its natural resources that water flowing south into Durotar had become corrupted. And then he built this humongous gun as a gift for Garrosh and even pointed it straight at Stormwind. It never went boom, but the Horde did pretty well with a huge influx of Goblin tech. You see, Gallywix knew to trade true power, and to get true power, well, you needed gizmos, you needed gadgets, but especially ones from the past. So, when the whole Pandaria thing happened, he sets up an operation on Pandaria called the Plunder Squad Initiative. When there, two of his agents found a sacred scroll, but before handing it over to Gallywix, had a vision and saw a future where Gallywix would refuse to give the scroll to Garrosh. Garrosh was, of course, war chief at the time, and he had no time for treachery, and so in their vision, well, they saw that he would find this out and go on a rampage against all goblins in the Horde, which would have been quite bad. And with that story, we get a clear point and a lesson about his character. The whole thing is that when he would get this scroll, instead of loyally handing it over to his war chief, right, in order to help the cause, what would he do? Well, he would see leverage. He would think to himself, the art of the deal, and he would try to get better terms or something like that from Garrosh. And that is a game that Garrosh would not play. And I don't bring the story up randomly because today, years later, we question whether or not Gallywix was going to hold out on xal'atath, because he did have leverage over her with the Dark Heart. He was trying to worm his way out of things, and we even know with that vision that had he got the scroll, he would have tried to hold out on Garrosh. Though in a way, even if he had tried to hold out on xal'atath and use his leverage over her, of course it wouldn't really have mattered, because xal'atath was also tricked whenever Phase Thief Azir came in, grabbed the Dark Heart and floated off to do whatever he's doing, which seems to lead us into 11.2. But the reason why this is important is that it's very out of character for Gallywix to go down the way that he did, for things to be that plain and simple. We can return to Mists of Pandaria for more clear examples. Even as the Darkspear Rebellion ended Garrosh's tyranny, Gallywix held his cards close to his chest, and he refused to join the rebellion until the very end, when it was beyond obvious who would win. Gallywix had ensured his position as a leader in the Horde, but he became an outsider, right? Because it's Gallywix, people didn't like him. Now that is a position that suited Sylvanas just fine when she became war chief, and that allowed Gallywix to position himself as a key ally and agent, all of course fueling his own pet project with Azerite weaponry. Because Gallywix had seen the power and the profit potential in Azerite from the day he shaped it into his staff years ago. That's why he was the first to work out how we could make guns and weapons of war from Azerite. Hugely powerful stuff to get a one-up on the Alliance, all whilst making a quick buck. But he didn't know the truly thingicidal, shall I say, to avoid the YouTube bots, thinking that Sylvanas was working with. She demanded more and more weapons, fueling the anima flooding into the Shadowlands, and that stuff was mostly above Gallywix's head. I think he genuinely thought he was just profiteering off a good old-fashioned war. It became clear to him, though, that he had backed the wrong side of the Horde, whenever Sylvanas told the Horde that they were nothing and she disappeared off Team Rocket style into the Shadowlands. At that point, he was unceremoniously booted from the Horde, out of his cartel, and told to go kick rocks. With that, Gazlo was now the top Goblin. But as we very well know, it wasn't the end of Gallywix's story. After pulling a Team Rocket, Sylvanas flees to Icecrown, shatters the veil between worlds, and Gallywix is nowhere to be found. We just had no idea where he had went. Goblin politics was not being covered at all. It felt completely far away. But when we went to the Shadowlands, we noticed these guys, the Brokers. And the Brokers are truly a curious bunch. It's kind of funny, they themselves have so many parallels with the Goblins, right? They're split into cartels. You've got Cartel V, who hunt ancient artifacts, Cartel Ta for exotic animals, and Cartel Xi, who are the brokers that basically just get whatever they want by whatever means. We ended up fighting quite a few of them. Now, all that broker drama brought us to Tazavesh. Tazavesh was a fairly amazing place. It was a market hidden somewhere in the afterlife. And who do we find there but Jastor Gallywix? And he is making deals with Cartel Xi, the very guys that we were fighting. And when you click on him, you see that he is still called a trade prince, which hinted that even without the Bilgewater and the Horde, Gallywix had somehow found his way to stay at the top, to stay important. At that stage, it's hardly like he was working with Sylvanas. She was obviously evil, basically under the jailer's thrall for quite a time. So what was he doing? Where was this story going? Well, the answer ended up being straight to Undermine, but we don't really know how exactly. We just know he was there, that he made deals, and then we saw him again in Undermine. And that, in a way, is the point of this video. If Blizzard had something planned for all of this in the future, right? Well, they probably would have done things differently. They probably wouldn't have gotten rid of Gallywix in the way that they did. They probably wouldn't have had him just decide, no, I'm actually powerful enough to kill all of you with raw force and technology. Because looking at that character's actions for years upon years, that's just not how he would act. So the core contention of this video is that Gallywix was murdered for the lore, to tie up loose ends. And that brings me to the last mystery in Gallywix's life. When did he meet xal'atath? Is the answer in Legion whilst she was in the Blade of the Black Empire? Could it have been that? I mean, the Horde Shadow Priest probably met him from time to time. Maybe she was making subtle suggestions for years. But I don't think it's that. I think it's more likely that xal'atath didn't deal with Gallywix until she needed him. And that means, of course, black blood and then eventually repairing the Darkheart. Because, of course, even before Illyria cracked the Darkheart, we saw Darkfuse goblins in action trying to get in our way in the max level campaign. So we can't say when, but the deal likely happened after Tazavesh. The question, though, is if they are related. And that's what brings me to the bit in this video that's not just explaining how, yeah, they've probably got rid of Gallywix and tied up a bunch of loose ends so they can clearly proceed with the World Soul Saga, but this leaves us with a link. So let me explain that link. Here's a character called Kaivessa. She's an ethereal from Narubar. And what's weird is her name is not like most ethereals that we've met. It follows the exact same naming structure of Shadowlands' brokers, where we had characters like Vinari, Nari of Cartel V. Perhaps this character is Vessa of Cartel Kai. You see, until now, it's been weird. The link between the ethereals and the brokers has looked completely obvious, but it's never been direct, right? They look similar, they appear to have a similar culture, but that's it. There's nothing overt. But now our links are Kaivessa's name, Gallywix being involved with both, meaning there is likely a causal link between what he was doing in Tazavesh and how he ended up in Undermine, albeit one the Blizzard have likely sped ran through because it's not the point of the story anymore. But where this really builds to a crescendo is the final link, and that is the ethereal-smelling mysteries of xal'atath's true origin and identity. The good news is I've already spelled that out, and you can watch it all in this next video.